A single phone call can shatter a carefully constructed life. For Mason Reed, it was the absence of one. 16 years of vigilance dissolved into panic as the security protocols he'd established with his daughter went unanswered. In the Montana wilderness, where he'd built their refuge from a corrupt system, Mason stared at the blinking notification on his encrypted monitor. Someone had found them, someone who knew exactly who they were running from, and now the only person he had left in this world was gone, taken by the very shadows he'd once served. The rumors had been circulating through Washington, D.C.'s power corridors for weeks. Whispers of destabilization, of foreign interference in domestic affairs. But to those who knew how to read between redacted lines, something felt manufactured about the intelligence reports crossing departmental desks. In a glass-walled office overlooking the Potomac, Deputy Director of National Intelligence Victoria Harlow reviewed the latest security briefings with a practiced detachment that had become her trademark. At 38, her reputation for ruthless efficiency had earned her both admirers and enemies within the intelligence community. Her steel-gray pantsuit and perfectly composed expression revealed nothing of the doubts that occasionally troubled her conscience late at night. Victoria's mentor, Director Lawrence Sullivan, appeared in her doorway. At 58, Sullivan's presence commanded respect, his silver hair and tailored suits projecting the stability the agency desperately needed in uncertain times. "The chatter's increasing," he said without preamble. "We've detected mentions of something called Myrmidon. Intelligence suggests it's a dead man's switch containing classified information that could destabilize the government. Any information which the government—" Victoria nodded, already calculating contingencies. "Source credibility? Multiple channels. Senator Griffin's committee is pressuring for immediate action." Sullivan's expression darkened. "You have authorization to use whatever resources necessary. This takes priority over everything else." After Sullivan left, Victoria remained at her desk, reviewing files on potential domestic threats. Her career advancement hinged on successfully neutralizing this situation. Yet something about the Myrmidon file felt wrong. Disconnected pieces forced together, intelligence shaped to fit a predetermined conclusion. Miles away in rural Montana, Mason Reed's cabin stood as a testament to paranoid preparation. Solar panels carefully concealed beneath camouflage netting, multiple escape routes mapped and memorized, communications equipment that would impress military contractors. Yet none of it had saved Ellie, his 16-year-old daughter, brilliant, resilient, and the only human being he truly trusted, had vanished during a supply run to the nearby town. Mason reviewed the surveillance footage for the 100th time. The unmarked black SUVs, the tactical precision of the men who took her. Most disturbing was how they'd known exactly how to disable his security systems. These weren't random kidnappers. They were professionals with inside knowledge. His encrypted terminal chimed, a message on a channel he hadn't used in years. "We know what you have. Bring the Myrmidon files to the Arlington exchange point in 48 hours. Mason stared at the screen, confusion mingling with rage. He had no idea what the Myrmidon files were, but he recognized the signature encryption pattern. Government black ops, the same people he'd fled from 6 years ago when he discovered how deeply corruption had penetrated the intelligence apparatus. He activated his emergency protocols and began gathering equipment. Whatever these Myrmidon files were, they were his only leverage to get Ellie back. And there was only one place to start looking, the same agency databases he'd once helped build. Victoria was working late, analyzing threat assessments, when the security breach alert flashed across her screen. Someone was accessing restricted databases, and doing it with an expertise that suggested insider knowledge. Instead of alerting security, she traced the intrusion herself. The digital fingerprint seemed hauntingly familiar. She dispatched a tactical team but insisted on leading the operation personally. The trace led to an abandoned warehouse in Alexandria. As Victoria entered with her weapon drawn, the shadows shifted. Before she could react, cold metal pressed against her temple. "Don't move." The voice was low, controlled, and unmistakable. Recognition flashed across Victoria's face as she slowly turned. "You're supposed to be dead." Mason Reed stepped into the dim light, his beard longer, his eyes harder than she remembered, but unmistakably the same analyst who had disappeared 6 years ago after raising concerns about domestic surveillance programs. "And you're supposed to have a conscience," he replied, his gun never wavering. "Where is my daughter?" The tension between them crackled like exposed wire. History, unspoken but remembered, hung in the stale air between them. "We don't have your daughter," Victoria said, maintaining the professional distance that had become her armor. "But someone wants you to think we do." Mason's laugh was bitter and hollow. Convenient deniability, always the agency's specialty. "If I wanted you dead, or captured, I wouldn't have come alone." She gestured toward his weapon. "We can keep playing this game, or we can figure out why someone is using your daughter to flush you out." Suspicion lined Mason's face. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone's manipulating my agency. And I think it's connected to your daughter's abduction. Something called Myrmidon. Does that mean anything to you?" The flicker in Mason's eyes was barely perceptible, but Victoria caught it. 6 years had honed her ability to read people, to detect the microscopic tells that betrayed hidden knowledge. "Never heard of it," Mason lied. But his mind raced to connect fragments of memory. Before he went off-grid, he'd been analyzing surveillance systems, programs designed to monitor political activities that were being misused to blackmail elected officials. Was this connected? Victoria took a calculated risk and holstered her weapon. "Whoever took your daughter believes you have these files. The same files that have my agency on high alert. That's not coincidence." Mason lowered his gun slightly but remained wary. "Your agency has been corrupt for years. How do I know you're not part of it?" "You don't," Victoria admitted. "But right now, I'm your best chance at finding your daughter. And you're my best lead on what Myrmidon actually is." Their uneasy alliance began with mutual distrust. Victoria represented everything Mason had fled from, a system that justified immoral actions in the name of national security. Mason embodied what Victoria had been taught to fear, a rogue agent with dangerous knowledge operating outside institutional constraints. "You abandoned your duty when we needed your expertise most," Victoria said, as they drove to a secure location. Mason's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "I abandoned a system that was eating itself from the inside, the same system that's now taken my daughter." At Victoria's safe house, Mason showed her the surveillance footage of Ellie's abduction. Victoria's trained eye recognized the tactical patterns immediately. A covert operations team that officially didn't exist, but answered to someone high in government. "These aren't rogue operators," she said, her voice revealing professional concern. "This is a sanctioned Black Ops team." "Sanctioned by whom?" Victoria hesitated before answering. "I need to check something. Wait here." Back at headquarters, Victoria discovered her security access had been restricted. Director Sullivan explained it as routine protocol, but subtle inconsistencies in his explanation triggered her suspicions. Files were missing. Meetings had occurred without her knowledge. The agency she'd devoted her life to was suddenly treating her like an outsider. Meanwhile, Mason broke into Senator Griffin's private office. The prominent senator chaired the committee overseeing intelligence funding and had been aggressively pushing for expanded domestic surveillance. In a hidden safe, Mason found references to Project Myrmidon and a list of targets, his name among them. When they reconvened, both realized their separate investigations pointed to a disturbing conclusion. Someone at the highest levels of government was using the intelligence apparatus for purposes beyond national security. Myrmidon was a Black Ops program, Mason explained, the technical language flowing easily despite his years away from the agency. Originally designed to infiltrate domestic political organizations suspected of foreign influence, but the data I saw suggested it evolved into something more sinister, a mechanism to engineer crises that would justify increased government control. Victoria's face paled as connections formed in her mind. Director Sullivan has been having private meetings with Senator Griffin. Officially, they're discussing budget allocations, but security protocols for those meetings exceed normal parameters. The kidnappers don't want mythical files, Mason concluded. They want to silence me permanently because I know too much about the system's original architecture. And they're using my daughter as bait. As they compared notes in Victoria's safe house, the windows shattered. Automatic weapons fire tore through the apartment. Mason tackled Victoria to the floor as bullets sprayed above them. The hit team moved with tactical precision, using Victoria's own agency protocols. They escaped through a pre-planned route, but not before Mason took a bullet grazed to his shoulder while shielding Victoria from a sniper. The injury was minor, but the implication significant. Victoria's location had been compromised from within her own agency. "Why did you do that?" Victoria asked later as she bandaged his wound in an abandoned maintenance facility. "Why? Put yourself between me and that bullet." Mason shrugged. "Reflex. Old habits." Victoria studied his face, seeing beyond the hardened exterior for the first time. "What happened to you, Mason? Your file said you were brilliant, on track for advancement. Then suddenly, you're raising red flags about surveillance overreach and disappearing with classified information." "I found something I wasn't supposed to," he said after a long pause. "Surveillance tools being used to gather compromising information on elected officials. Not for national security, for control. When I raised concerns, I was shut down. When I persisted, I was branded unstable. Then the accidents started happening." Victoria's training had taught her to dismiss such conspiracy theories. But her instincts, the same ones currently screaming that her own agency had been compromised, told her Mason was telling the truth. "And your wife? Your file mentioned she died in a car accident." Pain flashed across Mason's face. Ellen was a data analyst for the State Department. After I raised concerns, she started noticing irregularities in diplomatic communications. 2 weeks later, her car went off a mountain road. Mechanical failure, they said. Ellie was 6. Victoria felt an unwelcome pang of empathy. "So you took your daughter and disappeared." "I taught her how to live off-grid, how to question everything, how to survive if I couldn't protect her." His voice cracked slightly. "Fat lot of good it did." As pressure mounted, Victoria's professional world collapsed around her. Suspended from duty, pending an internal investigation, her security clearances revoked. Her colleague, Agent Jackson Moore, warned her privately that she was being set up as a scapegoat for a security breach. "They're saying you've been compromised," Moore told her in a hurried meeting in a parking garage, "that you've been passing classified information to a foreign asset. Someone matching Reed's description." Mason's situation deteriorated simultaneously. His journalist contact, Cynthia Myers, who had helped him disappear years ago, was arrested on fabricated charges. His emergency contacts went silent. Every support system he'd carefully constructed over years was being systematically dismantled. Victoria confronted Director Sullivan, only to be met with paternalistic concern about her mental state. "You've been under immense pressure, Victoria," he said, his voice smooth with practiced sincerity. "Perhaps this conspiracy theory about Senator Griffin is a manifestation of stress. Take some medical leave. Let us handle this Myrmidon situation." His reassurances felt hollow, rehearsed. Victoria left his office more convinced than ever that her mentor was involved in something beyond standard intelligence operations. Through careful hacking of sealed records, Mason discovered the truth about his wife's death. It wasn't an accident. Ellen Reed had been deliberately targeted after discovering evidence of electoral manipulation orchestrated through Project Myrmidon. The same project now being used to justify a new wave of domestic surveillance. "They killed her," Mason said, his voice flat with the dull acceptance of long-suspected truth, finally confirmed. "They made it look like an accident because she found evidence of them manipulating voting patterns in key districts, not changing votes. Subtler than that. Targeted misinformation, manipulated polling locations, selective voter suppression." Victoria had uncovered her own disturbing evidence, financial records showing Sullivan had approved funding for operations that didn't exist in official records. Operations that coincided with manufactured crises that had expanded their agency's powers over the past decade. Watching Mason's reaction to learning the truth about his wife's death shifted something fundamental in Victoria's worldview. His pain was raw, genuine, the same ache she'd felt when an operation she'd led resulted in civilian casualties that were covered up by the agency. They told me it was necessary, Victoria admitted quietly, that the greater good sometimes requires sacrifice. Mason looked at her with tired eyes. That's how it starts. Small compromises for good reasons, then bigger ones for the same reasons, until one day you're the villain in someone else's story. The external pressure intensified. Senator Griffin appeared on national news announcing a new security initiative in response to credible terrorist threats. He cited classified intelligence showing the need for expanded surveillance powers, the same powers Mason had warned about years ago. Director Sullivan issued a warrant for Victoria's arrest, claiming she'd been compromised by a foreign intelligence asset, Mason Reed. Evidence was fabricated showing her passing classified information. The system they'd both served, in different ways, was now targeting them both. Agent Moore secretly met with Victoria to warn her that a special operations team had been deployed, with shoot-to-kill orders for both her and Mason. "They're not taking chances anymore," Moore said. "Whatever you've stumbled onto, they're willing to eliminate 2 senior intelligence officers to keep it buried." Cornered in an abandoned industrial facility, Victoria and Mason prepared for their final stand. When tactical teams surrounded the building, they assumed the end had come. Instead, Agent Moore appeared with his own team and helped them escape. "Something's wrong at the highest levels," Moore explained as they fled. "Too many coincidences, too many convenient crises that always lead to the same outcome, more power for people like Griffin." As they regrouped in a secure location, Victoria and Mason realized that finding Ellie and exposing the conspiracy were inseparable missions. The kidnappers didn't want mythical files. They wanted to silence Mason permanently and used Victoria as a scapegoat. Most disturbing was their discovery that Griffin and Sullivan were planning a false flag operation, a terrorist attack that would be blamed on domestic extremists, justifying martial law and suspension of civil liberties. And somehow, Ellie was part of their plan. While investigating Sullivan's private communications, Victoria made a horrifying discovery that shattered her already fragile moral compass. She had been personally involved in the operation that resulted in the death of Mason's wife. Victoria had been told Ellen Reed was a foreign agent passing classified information. She didn't pull the trigger, but she had authorized the operation based on intelligence provided by Sullivan. Intelligence she had never questioned. The knowledge suffocated her. Every interaction with Mason now felt like a betrayal. Every time he mentioned his daughter, Victoria remembered, the mother, whose death she had sanctioned. The weight of complicity crushed her professional detachment. Before Victoria could decide whether to confess, Mason discovered the truth himself through files they'd uncovered. His reaction was explosive, raw grief and rage that had been suppressed for years. He attacked Victoria physically before pulling back, devastated by the betrayal. "You sit there and talk about justice while my daughter is missing?" Mason's voice shook with fury. "You killed her mother. You've destroyed everything I ever loved." Victoria didn't dodge the accusation. "I was doing my job. I was told she was a threat to national security. And you never questioned it?" Mason's contempt was palpable. "Never wondered why a data analyst with no field training would suddenly become a foreign agent? That's the problem with people like you. Blind loyalty to a corrupt system." Mason left, determined to find Ellie on his own. Victoria, shaken to her core, began questioning every operation she'd ever authorized. How many other threats were actually innocent people who discovered inconvenient truths? She returned to her apartment to find it ransacked. Director Sullivan waited in her living room, looking more disappointed than angry. "I groomed you to take my place someday, Victoria. Your talent for making difficult decisions is why I invested so much in your career." Victoria stood her ground. What happened to Ellen Reed? Was she really a threat? Sullivan didn't answer directly. Sometimes patriots have to make difficult choices. Senator Griffin has a vision for this country. Stability, security, strength. Visionaries are always misunderstood in their time. His oblique justification confirmed what Victoria had already realized. Ellen Reed had been eliminated not because she was a threat to national security, but because she threatened someone's political ambitions. Sullivan offered Victoria a final chance to do the right thing and help capture Mason. When she refused, Sullivan had her arrested on charges of espionage and treason. Meanwhile, Mason tracked one of Ellie's kidnappers to a private security firm with government contracts. He captured the man and forced him to reveal that Ellie was being held at a black site facility outside the city. As Mason prepared to rescue his daughter, he was ambushed by Griffin's security team. During the brutal fight, he discovered evidence that Griffin planned to use Ellie in the false flag operation. She would be one of the terrorists killed during the attack, with evidence planted to tie her to extremist groups. In custody, Victoria was confronted by Agent Moore, who revealed his true allegiance. His previous help had been calculated, designed to guide them into a trap. Griffin will restore order to a chaotic world, Moore explained with the fervor of a true believer. Sometimes you need controlled destruction to build something stronger. Victoria stared at her former colleague with dawning horror. And the innocent people who die in your controlled destruction? Ellen Reed? Her daughter? Moore's smile was cold. Necessary sacrifices. You used to understand that. The realization hit Victoria with physical force. She had become what she most feared, a tool for corrupt power. Her moral crisis reached its peak when she was given a choice: help them capture Mason or face charges of treason. Mason, severely injured from the ambush, realized he couldn't save Ellie alone. Despite everything, Victoria was his only hope. But even if he could forgive her involvement in Ellen's death, she was now in custody herself. Victoria, faced with a fundamental choice about who she really was, chose conscience over career. During a prisoner transfer, she overpowered Moore and escaped, taking his weapon and credentials. Using her knowledge of agency protocols, she tracked Mason to an abandoned building where he was slowly bleeding out from wounds sustained in the ambush. She found him using techniques only someone with her training would know. Mason raised his gun weakly as she approached. "Why would you help me after what I said?" Victoria didn't flinch. "Because you were right about me, and I can't live with that person anymore." She treated his wounds with the field medical training that had once made her an exceptional operative. Their fragile truce was built on necessity rather than forgiveness. "I can never undo what happened to Ellen," Victoria acknowledged as she finished bandaging him. "But I can help save your daughter." Mason's eyes remained cold. "If anything happens to Ellie, our truce ends, permanently." Through Victoria's remaining agency contacts, they learned that Griffin's false flag operation was scheduled for the next day, a terrorist attack on a government building during a public event. The terrorists would include Ellie and other kidnapped civilians who'd been drugged and programmed to appear as domestic extremists. Mason hacked into the security firm's communications and discovered the location where Ellie was being held, a decommissioned military facility repurposed as a private intelligence black site. "Even if we save Ellie, they'll just find other pawns for their game," Mason said as they planned their counter-operation. "We need to end this permanently." Victoria nodded grimly. "We need proof so solid that even their allies can't ignore it, and we need a way to distribute it that they can't control." Victoria contacted Cynthia Myers, who had been released from custody but remained under surveillance. Using coded language from Cynthia's journalism days with Mason, Victoria arranged for her to be ready to publish whatever evidence they found. Mason reached out to his underground network of whistleblowers and government outcasts, people who'd been waiting years for a chance to expose the system that had destroyed their lives. Victoria used her knowledge of black site protocols to infiltrate the facility where Ellie was held. Inside, she discovered dozens of other prisoners, people who had stumbled onto pieces of Griffin's conspiracy over the years and been made to disappear. As she located Ellie, Victoria was confronted by Moore. Instead of fighting, she appealed to his buried conscience, revealing the full scope of Griffin's plot. Not just power, but a fundamental reshaping of American democracy into an authoritarian regime. "Even if what you're saying is true, it's too late to stop it," Moore said, his certainty wavering for the first time. "The operation is already in motion." Victoria held his gaze. "It's never too late to choose which side of history you want to be on." Meanwhile, Mason broke into Sullivan's private residence and discovered a hidden server containing the entire history of Project Myrmidon. Years of manufactured crises, manipulated elections, and eliminated whistleblowers. As he was downloading the files, Sullivan returned unexpectedly. Rather than calling security immediately, Sullivan engaged Mason in conversation, revealing his twisted, ideological justification. "The public can't handle the truth," Sullivan explained with the calm certainty of the truly dangerous. "They need direction, control. Democracy is failing because people make emotional choices instead of rational ones." Mason's disgust was evident. "And who decides what's rational? Men like you and Griffin? Men who've never faced a consequence in your lives?" As Victoria helped Ellie and the other prisoners escape, Moore set off an alarm. It was unclear whether he'd betrayed her again or was creating a diversion. Griffin's security team surrounded the facility. Victoria and the prisoners were trapped, with limited options for escape. At Sullivan's house, Mason was captured by Griffin himself, who revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The terrorist attack would kill hundreds, including several political opponents, justifying nationwide martial law. "Your daughter was just leverage to draw you out," Griffin explained with casual cruelty. "You're the loose end that needs tying up." As all seemed lost, Agent Moore made his choice. He helped Victoria and the prisoners escape through a hidden tunnel system, sacrificing himself to hold off Griffin's men. "Make it count," were his final words to Victoria. Mason, facing execution, revealed to Griffin that the download wasn't just collecting evidence. It was also planting a virus designed years ago specifically to target Myrmidon's infrastructure. Within minutes, the system would crash, preventing the coordinated false flag attack. Griffin raced to stop the virus, giving Mason an opportunity to escape with the evidence. Victoria got Ellie and the other prisoners to safety, contacting Cynthia to arrange secure transportation. Mason and Victoria reunited at a predetermined location. For the first time, Ellie and Victoria met, tension and resentment mixed with grudging gratitude. "My dad says you're partly why my mom is dead, but also why I'm alive," Ellie said, her intelligent eyes assessing Victoria with unnerving precision. "I don't know what to do with that." Victoria met her gaze without flinching. "Neither do I." With Griffin's plot temporarily disabled but not destroyed, they raced to distribute the evidence before he could regroup. They set up in an abandoned broadcast facility that Mason had maintained as a contingency. As they prepared to release everything, Sullivan and Griffin tracked them down for a final confrontation. "You have no idea what forces you're playing with," Griffin warned, his polished political veneer cracking under pressure. "Release those files, and you won't just destroy me. You'll destroy public faith in every institution. It will be chaos." Mason's years of rage found focus in this moment. Maybe that's what's needed. A clean slate. "No," Victoria interjected. "Chaos just creates opportunity for people like Griffin. We need controlled disclosure." They faced a terrible choice. Release everything and potentially destabilize the government entirely, or selectively release information that would stop Griffin but preserve some of the system Victoria still believed could be redeemed. Their debate represented their core philosophical differences. Mason's righteous anger against Victoria's pragmatic hope for reform. "Half-truth got us here," Mason argued. "Only the full truth gets us out." Victoria stood her ground. "And what happens to the thousands of innocent people who depend on stable government? The full truth doesn't just expose the guilty, it punishes everyone." Ellie, who had remained silent during their debate, finally spoke. "What would Mom want us to do?" The question hung in the air, a reminder of the personal cost behind their political argument. They chose a middle path, exposing Griffin and Sullivan's immediate plot and providing enough evidence to ensure prosecution, while keeping the deeper historical manipulations contained until safeguards could be established. As they prepared the selective disclosure, Griffin made a final desperate move. He triggered explosives planted throughout the building. In the chaos, Sullivan attempted to delete the evidence but was stopped by Victoria. Griffin tried to escape but was confronted by Mason. Griffin, rather than face public humiliation and prosecution, took his own life, a final act of control. Sullivan, however, surrendered, offering to testify against the remaining conspirators in exchange for leniency. Victoria faced him with cold satisfaction. You taught me that sometimes we make compromises for the greater good. Consider this yours." The immediate conspiracy was exposed. Griffin's death was reported as a suicide prompted by impending corruption charges. Sullivan's testimony implicated several other high-ranking officials while protecting the fundamental institutions. Victoria faced a congressional hearing where she revealed select parts of the truth. She resigned from her position but avoided prosecution in exchange for her role in exposing the plot. Mason and Ellie prepared to disappear again, creating new identities. The system had been wounded but not transformed. There would always be other Griffins. Victoria met Mason and Ellie one last time before they disappeared. "I can never make right what happened to Ellen," Victoria said, the professional mask finally gone from her face. "But the people directly responsible have faced justice." Mason's expression remained guarded. "Justice is a generous word for what happened. But it's something." Victoria gave Ellie a file containing all the classified information about her mother, who she really was, not the false narrative created to justify her elimination. "I thought you should know the truth about her," Victoria told Ellie. "She was a hero who saw something wrong and tried to stop it. Like your father." They parted with unresolved feelings, resentment, gratitude, and something more complicated between Mason and Victoria. "In another life, things might have been different," Mason acknowledged. Victoria's smile was tinged with regret. "Maybe in this one too, someday." No promises were made, but a door was left open. 1 year later, Victoria had started a new life teaching ethics at a university, occasionally consulting on intelligence reform. In her apartment, she kept a small memento, a chess piece, a knight, that Mason had left behind. It represented the complex game they had played and the moral compromise they had ultimately chosen. In her desk drawer, Victoria kept a secure drive containing the full Myrmidon files, the complete truth that they had decided the world wasn't ready for. She occasionally reviewed them, reminding herself of the fragility of the systems people trust. "Justice isn't found in courtrooms or congressional hearings," Victoria reflected in private moments. "Sometimes it's just the quiet acknowledgement between people who've seen the darkness in each other and chosen to see the light instead." Victoria received an unmarked envelope containing a Polaroid photo of Ellie at a graduation ceremony. She was smiling, healing, building a new life. There was no note, just a small chess piece, a queen taped to the back. Across town, Mason watched from a distance as Victoria found the photo. Their eyes met briefly across the space. No words were exchanged, but there was a recognition of pain endured, of choices made, of possible futures. Ellen used to say that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, it's about choosing not to let it control your future, Mason thought as he turned away. "I'm not there yet, but for Ellie's sake, for all our sakes, I'm trying." A news report played on a television, showing a congressional hearing about intelligence oversight. New safeguards were being implemented, imperfect, but progress. Both Victoria and Mason watched the same hearing from different locations. Both looked thoughtful, neither fully satisfied nor completely disappointed. The final image showed Ellie, now in college, researching historical government overreach for a paper. On her desk was a photograph of her mother that had been included in the file Victoria gave her. The true story, not the official one. As Ellie typed, her thoughts drifted to her mother's words, recorded in journals Victoria had recovered. "The truth isn't something you find, it's something you build together, piece by piece, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." In Washington, new power players moved through the same corridors. Different names, similar ambitions, the system continued, wounded but resilient.